Madam Chairman, Ranking Member, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of more than 200,000 members and supporters of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, I thank you for the opportunity to share our views on this important issue. I've spent 14 years in the Marine Corps trying to execute the Marine Corps' two missions, winning battles and making Marines. As an IAVA staff member, I don't make soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines, but I do try and make their lives better. The views expressed in this testimony reflect the views and analysis of IAVA and not the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for your attention to the pressing issues facing our nation's veterans. Unemployment is arguably the most pressing issue facing veterans today. While recent statistics may indicate that the employment outlook might be getting better for veterans, the situation is still worse than it ought to be. For example, the unemployment rate for veterans 18 to 24 years old is nearly double the rate for 18 to 24-year-old civilians. Helping veterans create their own jobs via small business has been touted as part of the solution. Many people have wondered whether federal contracting laws and goals are being met, and if not, what is the best manner in which to do so? There are three main areas to consider: data, outreach, and implementable solutions. I will address outreach first. IAVA believes that the logical place to begin is through the Transition Assistance Program, also known as TAP, and in the Marine Corps, TAMP. Because TAP is now mandatory for all service members, it is a convenient touch point that will allow for the dissemination of information on federal contracting processes and opportunities and the most basic level of training to the widest possible audience. The Small Business Administration is currently developing an entrepreneurship track for TAP, and we believe that this will be a key component in setting veterans up for success. We also believe that allowing veterans and their spouses to retake TAP after separating, as proposed in S. 2246, the TAP Modernization Act of 2012, is a necessary step. Allowing a veteran or spouse who has completed one track of TAP, education for instance, to retake a different track based on new circumstances, in this case an entrepreneurship track, is a small investment on the front end which we believe will pay big dividends on the back end. On the question of data, we must ask, what do we know and what do we wish to know? There's a lot of data to be had, but much of it is dispersed among different agencies. Vets 100 and 100A has some meaningful data, but only as a snapshot. It is also not easily accessible. The information is more akin to a head count and misses some crucial information. Because Vets 100 and 100A allows reporting of veterans employed at any point during the filing year, there is no guarantee that the level of veteran employment by a federal contractor or subcontractor is consistently reliable or accurate. A contractor may have 100 vets at the beginning of the year and 2 at the end and can report 100 vets employed. In addition, without the inclusion of other relevant information, the value of the Vets 100A and 100A forms is limited. Some good examples would be the North American Industry Classification System codes that allow tracking the number of veteran contractors by industry type and the era from which the veteran hails. These pieces of information would help elucidate in which industries veteran contractors are most heavily and lightly concentrated and whether that force is declining due to age. Much of that information resides with SBA. The certification process for a service-disabled veteran-owned small business or veteran-owned small business should also be easy and consistent. IAVA supports efforts to curb fraud and abuse by ascertaining the veracity of SDVO or veteran-owned status, but we recognize that the certification process should not discourage small businesses with limited resources. We are concerned that the statutorily mandated certification process currently used by the Veterans Administration is too cumbersome. Extending this system to all federal agencies, as has been proposed, would be unnecessarily burdensome on both government and small businesses. It is also worth noting that the VA's Center for Veterans Enterprise site, www.vetbiz.com, was down for approximately 2 weeks. It was up last Thursday and is now back down again for maintenance. And there is no information posted as to when new veterans may expect to be able to register their businesses online. The Small Business Administration has relied on self-certification and has experienced little fraud. IAVA believes that maintaining this system with some enhanced documentation requirements will help ease the burden on SDVO and veteran-owned small businesses while helping to guarantee that the consideration earned through service to country is not abused. As far as solutions go, during research for this testimony, we pursued many different leads on making the system more efficient and increasing the number of veteran contractors. Many of the recommendations we heard often already exist in some form. For example, the idea of a searchable, centralized database of veteran contractors that could be used by federal contracting officers and federal contractors already exists as the Central Contractor Registration, CCR, and Dynamic Small Business Search, DSBS systems. The use of those resources to find veteran contractors, even by federal contracting officers, appears to be less than optimal because, we were told, many people choose, quote, the path of least resistance, end quote. Part of the assessment of the problem will require a review of the use of existing systems and processes. But without data that's substantial, accessible, and easy to understand, the implementing solutions is a little bit akin to shooting first and aiming later. Some of the reviews of this data are already underway and ideally will result in clarifying best and worst practices so good solutions can be found. We also believe that VA and DOL should be funnels to the Small Business Administration. SBA are the experts on small business and should be the prime actor in this area. IAVA strongly welcomes the efforts of Congress, the executive branch, and private industry in increasing the number of veteran contractors, whether those contractors are fulfilling government or private contracts. As part of our commitment, IAVA is willing to spread the word about available opportunities for training to our membership and the greater population through our extensive social media outreach. We are also able and willing to partner with either government agencies or private corporations in targeted efforts to help increase veteran employment through our programs, such as smart job fairs held in partnership with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We believe that employment is the #1 issue facing veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan and will only become more important as the war in Afghanistan ends. IAVA appreciates the efforts of this subcommittee and the other witnesses, and we look forward to helping in any way we can. Thank you, and I'm prepared to answer any questions that you have.
I think this National Guard situation is a crisis. I think it is something that we are kind of sweeping under the rug and not paying close attention to. When I was the elected prosecutor in Kansas City, I remember looking at resumes and thinking the National Guard was a really good thing. Now, that was before it became an operational reserve. And I think the testimony that was given here today demonstrates the problem. You know, these companies aren't hiring people just because they want to hire a veteran. They're hiring them because they need them for their ongoing business operations, and you can't blame them for not wanting to hire someone and train them thinking they're going to be gone 4 or 5 times over a 6 or 7 year period, or 4 or 5 times over a 7 or 8 year period, or even 4 or 5 times over a 10-year period. Now, I know we are drawing down in Afghanistan, and obviously we have drawn down in Iraq, but I think that we have permanently injured the ability of the National Guard to get employment in our country by the way we have made these changes, and I don't think they were well thought out. I get it, we didn't have enough boots, and we had to do it because our ground force wasn't big enough. But what I don't think they anticipated that there was going to be this problem, and I think it's one of the reasons that we've had some of the problems with suicides and some of the other issues that we're seeing in our military. What would you recommend that we could do, short of convincing our military leadership that they need to go back to the old way in terms of utilizing the Guard and the Reserve? What could we do that could help this problem?
Well, ma'am, I mean, you really hit on the big crux of the matter, is that the National Guard and the reserves have been used in an unprecedented fashion in the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've been used as an operational reserve. And I know that in briefings that I've been to at the Pentagon, the Army has talked about their force generation model that they refer to as R4Gen. Envisions Guard and Reserve units activating at least once, or they say once every 5 years. So out of every 5-year period, you can expect to be deployed out of the National Guard or Reserve. And more often, if you're switching units, and you happen to catch the unit at the right or the wrong time, depending on your opinion, in the cycle. And that's going to be a continued issue, particularly with smaller employers who can stand to absorb that loss less well. I know that there are, what we've heard from our membership, somewhat anecdotally, is that they're not getting hired because they're in the Guard or Reserve, and that employers have. It's one of the questions that they're often asked. Are you Are you in the Guard or Reserve? Are you anticipating deploying anytime soon? And that there are some bills both in the House and the Senate that are designed at strengthening USERA protections and make that law a little bit tougher. But really...
And USERA protections are the protections that were put into the law that prohibit the discrimination against members of the Guard and Reserve in connection with their military service.
Yes, ma'am. So having those employment and reemployment rights a little bit stronger, we believe is always a good thing. But we think that incentivizing employers is, it's better to dangle the carrot than break out the stick. And we believe that most employers want to hire veterans. It's just, like you said, those concerns of missing out an employee who you anticipate having, especially if you're a small or medium-sized business. That's really a tough question. We've been trying to work with employers through our smart job fairs to convince them, that here's the value of a Guard or reservist, and that they may be gone for a year out of a 5-year period, but their skills as managers and leaders are going to be sharper. And I deployed with a reserve unit to Iraq. It was a light armored reconnaissance unit. We had obviously heavily mechanical, and we had a lot of mechanics in the civilian world who I would say that after the 9 months that we were deployed, tearing engines out and tearing them apart and rebuilding them in 1.5 feet of moon dust sand in the Iraqi desert without any electricity, without any water, without any lifts, basically improvising all this. The Cummins diesel engines and transmissions, Detroit diesel engines that were on the trucks that they repaired back in their civilian lives, that made them much better and more efficient at their jobs once they returned home. And that's really a job of selling that to potential employers, because the Army, as you said, and the Marine Corps, which is, I understand, going to operate on a similar force generation model with respect to reserves, are not going to change that because of the operational commitments that we have and what they need to fulfill.
Is there an idea? Let me just throw an idea, and I have a couple questions more specific to anyone who wants to answer this. I'll start with you, Ramsey, if that's okay. To create an incentive for the businesses to know they're going to be gone for a period of time. The question is, how long can you keep those kind of jobs open? Is there, through tax policy, is there an opportunity to create incentives to incentivize them not only to hire them, but to keep that space open and creating flex schedules? I don't know who wants to answer. Oh, get that.
Sir, I agree in large part with what Mr. DeWalt said, but, one of the things that also has to be considered is that less than 1% of the population has served in these conflicts.
Right.
So this isn't a situation where, like a World War II, where you had, I think, 11% is the figure, and so everybody had a brother or cousin or husband or wife or,
right.
Sister or, there was a relative or a neighbor, somebody who was close to you. And so everybody had sacrifice. I mean, there was, rationing of sugar and gas stamps. I mean, my grandfather went away, and all his brothers. And it's interesting to hear my grandmother talk about, silk stockings, not being able to have stockings during World War II. And I think that's just weird. It's just something that isn't in, and I've been in the Marine Corps for 14 years, and that's something that, just doesn't enter my mind. But I think employers have to understand that there's sacrifice associated and with the wars that have been fought, and that, while tax incentives or direct stipends, if those are the carrots that we come to understand are the best solutions and that we can afford to do, hey, that would be great. But it's also a matter of the country
it's
sharing
a moral
sacrifice.
obligation.
Yes, sir. It's a moral obligation. The reservists that I took over, a lot of them, as Mr. DeWalt said, lost their jobs before we left. Hard economic times, your job's gone. We don't, and under USERA, if the job disappears, you don't have to find another position. So employers understanding that, this is this is part of the shared sacrifice. And hopefully, as Afghanistan winds down, this becomes less and less of a problem. But as Senator McCaskill, pointed out, with the unprecedented use and the Army Force Generation model that I was talking about,
right.
It remains to be seen exactly what effect that's going to have in the future, continuing an operational reserve. So we really feel at IAVA that it's a moral obligation. It's a small percentage of the population that's been doing a lot of the fighting in multiple deployments. And
let me hold you there, only because I get one quick question left here, and that is, it's a big question, but kind of in January 11, GAO reported how many different employment training programs there are. I think it's 40, 50, between Department of Labor, Department of Veterans Affairs, and all these other miscellaneous. I'm coming more and more to the feeling that maybe we, consolidate these, put them all in the Department of Veterans, focus in that arena. Give me a couple quick thoughts. My time is pretty close to being out here, but I just think we have so many Department of Labor tries, bless their soul, but veterans understand veterans, and it seems like we should just shift it all, streamline it, and focus on what we should be doing, and that is employing and retraining, and have the Veterans Administration do it in concert with their veterans benefit programs and all these other things they do. Thoughts from folks?
Yes, sir. There's
Take your time. You don't need to hurry.
Okay. There's legislation in the House that's currently working its way through. I think it's H.R. 4072,
right.
Which IAVA supports and is designed to take Department of Labor and VETS program and transfer it wholesale to the VA. We subscribe to the same thinking that you have, sir, that Veterans Affairs is what a veteran thinks of when, where do I go for help? I'm going to the VA. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the legislation is written to just basically make an address change is a good thing, because it's not diminishing any of the functions of the VETS program.
I mean, it seems like if you're a vet, you're coming in, you're trying to figure out, do I need some more education if I want to be in this job, and do I need any medical assistance in some of the issues that I might have had or might not have? But it seems like you want to do that just kind of in one place.
Yes, sir. And DOL VETS has employment outreach, and VA has employment outreach. And so having DOL VETS move and become VA VETS and do the employment for veterans at VA, to us, makes sense, because it removes some of that duplicative effort that's over at VA, and it just centralizes it all. And that's a little bit that I talked about in my testimony here as well. With the numbers and the outreach, for veteran small business, we feel that DOL or VA should be a conduit. That DOL should be a conduit. If veterans come to DOL or VA looking for small business help and advice, they should go to the Veterans Outreach over at SBA, because those are the experts. And that's the same thing that we feel with DOL VETS moving to VA.